This episode is dealing with sugar and carbohydrate addiction, and there's going to be a little bit of tough love. Hey, what's shaking bacon? My name's Bruno Panucci. I hope you're doing well. So I hope some of you are keeping up with a squat challenge. I myself had to actually stop that squat challenge for a couple weeks. I got pretty sick, but I'm back at it. And let me tell you, I've noticed a lot of exhaustion in the legs. So it's rather abnormal. I think a lot of people out there have reached out and mentioned the same thing. So it's 10 squats every 45 minutes for an 8.5 hour day. Now, because of the nature of my work, I have to adapt that schedule, but I'm still basically doing the same thing by the end of the day, the same amount of squats, and I'm trying to even it out as much as I can throughout the day. But let's move on from that. The topic of today's video is dealing with sugar and carbohydrate addiction. So the interesting thing about sugar and carbohydrate addiction is this: addiction is addiction is addiction. I don't care if it's drugs, alcohol, carbohydrates, or anything else, pornography, it doesn't matter. Addiction is addiction. And when you have an addictive attitude or you have an addictive substance in your life, whatever it is, you're having trouble getting rid of it, then you know there's a problem. If you're doing something and it's causing harm to you and you can't stop yourself from doing that, there's a good chance there's an addiction going on there. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this out. It does take a rocket scientist, unfortunately, to understand if it applies to you and the depth it applies to you. So I dealt with sugar and carbohydrate addiction for years. I didn't know there was such a thing until 2013 when I first started a zero-carb diet. Now, it wasn't the healthiest zero-carb diet because there was no fat in that diet. And I basically suffered from protein poisoning for about a year, and it was really exhausting. And that's a whole other video. But this video is about dealing with addiction. And I realized after I broke up with carbs for a year and I started to try them again, even though they're very small amounts, eventually it became a slippery slope and I went right back to where I was, where I lost sight of my portion sizes and the frequency, and I was giving into every craving all the time. And I eventually came across carnivore, and I had a rough time sticking to it, just like I had a rough time sticking to a zero-carb diet. Now, even though I had more fat in my diet than on a zero-carb diet, I was still dealing with that addictive behavior. And I was either doing carnivore or I wasn't doing anything like carnivore. And it took a few years before I became consistent. And for me, I recognized at one point, after I binged for months, after I had to put my dog down, it was probably one of the worst experiences of my life. And when I did that, I just ate nothing but junk food for like about 5 months afterwards, from August right through till the beginning of January. It wasn't the exact like 1st of January. It had nothing to do with making any sort of New Year's resolution. It just happened to be early January when I realized I had no control over my addiction. And when somebody has an addictive issue, whether it's drugs or alcohol, or in our case, carbohydrates, and you can't control it, then that's a serious problem. And I recognized the depth of my addiction. I realized I had no control over it. And there was no trying to moderate carbohydrates. I just happened to be one of those people who I finally learned was an abstainer. I didn't know that lingo wasn't around of being an abstainer or a moderator with carnivore or sugar or carbs. I didn't understand that. It wasn't something that was in my social circles. I didn't have an online community that talked about that. And if you don't deal with carbohydrates that way, then this video isn't for you, but it will help you to understand the mindset of people with addictions. Now, everyone knows someone with some kind of addiction. Maybe it's alcohol. And it's funny how alcohol is one of those addictions that's very much like most people with sugar and carbohydrate addiction. They say with alcohol, 1 drink is too much and 20 is not enough. The same thing applies to people with sugar and carbohydrate addiction. They can maybe moderate for a while, but eventually when they go off the wagon, they binge and they go way off, and they have a hard time getting back in control of their sugar and carbohydrate addiction. And when they binge like crazy. They make up for lost time. It's like a coil that has been compressed too tight. And after a while, when it pops. And the harder it's been compressed, the harder it pops. Eventually, till you get to the point when you learn you have to replace that addiction. And you can't just stop an addictive behavior without replacing that addictive behavior. For people who are out there and they're struggling being consistent on a carnivore diet or being strict without having a lick, taste, or bite of anything on a carnivore diet, this is something you may have to stop and recognize is the issue. You can't treat yourself on your birthday. You can't treat yourself on Christmas. You can't treat yourself at the end of the week and think, I've been good this week, or I've been good this month, or I've been good this year. I'm just going to have this little bite. And I'm telling you, if you deal with sugar and carbohydrate addiction and you can't get rid of that issue, that little bite is going to bring that back. Maybe not the first time. Maybe you'll think, hey, that didn't go so bad. And a month later, you try it again. Maybe it's the second or third time. So when I reintroduced sugar after 1 year of being zero carb, I had it once a week, and it was a very small portion, and I was doing okay. So for a month, I had it once a week. The second month, I did it twice a week. Very small portion, like the equivalent of a scoop of ice cream. And I was like, okay, I got this under control. I never knew what it was like to be able to have such a small portion of sugary junk food and be satisfied with it. And I finally experienced that. And the third month, I tried it 3 times a week. And within that first week, 3 times a week, it was gone. And I was having carbs all the time, and I was giving into every craving. Now, some people, it might only take that one time. Some people, it might take 3 or 4 or 5 times a month. But you don't want to find out why it's a slippery slope. If you're an abstainer, you're an abstainer. You can't treat yourself on special occasions. If you're an alcoholic, you don't treat yourself because it's your birthday and think, well, I can have 1 drink. If you're a drug addict, you don't just go back to having drugs on a special occasion or because you reward yourself for not having drugs for so long, so you're going to just have this little bit. That's not how it works if you have an addiction problem. You have to completely abstain from that. So if you can moderate carbohydrates, I mean like you're a carnivore, but you have a little bit of carbohydrates every week, maybe like a bite of a muffin, your kids offer you some food, or you're just having a few potato chips here or there, or you can have something that is off a carnivore diet and you don't crave it afterwards. You can just have your 1 bite and be fine. Then that's good for you. But if you can't do that and you binge afterwards and you obsess over it, it's a frame of mind issue. You have to change your frame of mind and accept the fact that you have an addiction. I worked as an acupuncturist for years. And with acupuncture, we treated addiction, no matter what the type of addiction, almost exactly the same. Whether it was cigarettes or alcohol, addiction is addiction. It's just a different thing you're addicted to. You should be able to cut anything out of your lifestyle or diet and not have any side effects from it. Headaches, withdrawals, constant cravings for that. If you're going through that, you're going through withdrawal. And you have to really assess and think, wait a minute, like I didn't realize I had an actual addiction to this issue of sugar and carbohydrates in our case. So you have to find ways to deal with it. So I'm going to offer you a few suggestions. Change your environment. Get all that junk food out of your house. And I understand sometimes you aren't the only one living in your home, but ask for that support from your family. It's just for a few weeks and they will go back to their lives afterwards. And once you've got that out of your system, they will be able to just start having that food around the house and it won't bother you. I can be around that food all the time. I've made pizza while I'm on a zero carb carnivore diet and it doesn't affect me. It doesn't bother me. I don't have that craving for that anymore. So you can get to that point where you can be around it and it just doesn't faze you anymore. It takes a while to get there and everyone's a little different. You have to distract yourself. And in the beginning, stay full on the foods you can eat. I don't recommend stuffing yourself. That's not what I mean. But stay comfortably full all the time on foods you can eat. Even if you're not hungry, maybe have a little bit of something because you might not know when you're going to be able to eat. If you have plans to go out somewhere, eat before you go so that while you're out, you're not going to be tempted. Try and make it a fattier meat like a red meat so that you're going to be more satiated while you're gone. You'll find when you stick to red meat, you can go hours and hours and hours and not be hungry. Recognize the difference between being hungry and being thirsty. Recognize that you can't put yourself in those old situations while you're dealing with your addiction. Old situations like maybe going to certain grocery stores or going to certain fast food restaurants or going to visit certain friends. You just recognize you can't do that stuff anymore. And one of the most important things is finding a network, finding a group of people. So tuning into this YouTube channel is one thing. Tuning into other YouTube channels, not just carnivore channels, but people who deal with sugar and carbohydrate addictions. You want to find people who are carnivores who have gone down that road that you've gone down. I've gone down that road before, and I recommend coaching from Kelly Hogan. The reason is she's gone down that road before. Out of everyone I learned about carnivore from in the beginning, Dr. Sean Baker and Dr. Barry and a few other carnivores out there, I related to Kelly Hogan more. Even though she's a lady, she had the exact same relationship with food that I had. Dr. Sean Baker doesn't deal with that. He sees people with addiction. He helps people with addiction problems when they're becoming carnivore, but he's never had that issue. So Kelly Hogan had that exact relationship with food. When she talks about her story and her history, mine mirrors it really well. So I think it's really important to find someone that you can relate to, reach out to them, and see what you can do. Kelly Hogan offers carnivore coaching, and she offers ways to manage addiction, as long as a lot of other ways to deal with other common problems that come up with people who are trying carnivore and they're just not quite doing it right. So you can find Kelly Hogan always under my videos in her link on social media to Instagram, and she has her own YouTube channel, Kelly Hogan at My Zero Carb Life. So check that out. Find a way to help yourself. Sometimes you have to acknowledge not just that you have a problem, but maybe the depth of that problem. And it wasn't until I recognized the depth of my addiction when I did something about it. And at that point, for me, it was easy. Anyway, thanks a lot. Take care.